It's Jeffrey Guterman, and we're here for an interview with Larry Sabato, and I'm really looking forward to this one. It's supposed to start at 5 p.m. Eastern, and we're looking forward to Dr. Sabato joining us. I'm just getting myself set here in Studio B. So please stand by. 5 minutes till the interview begins. Stand by, please. In the meantime, let me mention that Larry Sabato is a Rhodes Scholar. He's the university professor of politics at the University of Georgia, the founder and director of the University of, Virginia, and also of the University of Virginia Center for Politics. He's the author of numerous books, including The Kennedy Half Century, The Presidency, Assassination, and Lasting Legacy of John F. Kennedy. And who better to reflect at this 60th anniversary than Larry Sabato? And we expect him in just about 4 minutes. Stand by, please. Ladies and gentlemen, in just a couple minutes, we're expecting Dr. Larry Sabato for the interview here on the 60th anniversary of the JFK assassination. Dr. Sabato is a Rhodes Scholar. He is University Professor of Politics at the University of Virginia. He is founder and director of the University of Virginia Center for Politics and the author of numerous books, including The Kennedy Half Century, The Presidency, Assassination, and Lasting Legacy of John F. Kennedy. And who better to speak to the 60th anniversary of that tragic event in Dallas than Larry Sabato. And we expect him any minute now, any minute. Any minute now. Any moment now, we expect Dr. Larry Sabato to join us. Please stand by now. Stand by, please. We're expecting Larry Sabato here at the top of the hour. I have a minute after. Stand by. He should be here any moment now. Well, maybe Larry is having some technical issues on his end or on my end. I'm not sure. He was due here about 2 minutes ago. It could be any moment now. And this has happened to us before. Oh my. They have to create a Ubuntu. He's going to be be unable to make it. I am so sorry. But look, sometimes we succeed, sometimes we don't. Good night, everybody. I'll stay on just for a minute uh, to see if this works, but I don't think it's going to work. I should have done them all on Spaces. I have one more of these with Bijan Bain, and that's due on next Wednesday, the 22nd, this Wednesday. The 22nd. And it's just not gonna. This is not gonna happen, though. We've done it before with Larry, with Bijan, and I am so sorry. At least I tried, right? I'll wait on a couple minutes just to see if they're gonna make it. I guess I'll wait till 10 after. It's always possible. Here we go.
You're live. All right.
Larry Sabato.
Yes. How are you, Jeff?
I'm doing okay.
Good.
It's great. It's great to see you.
Well, I'm so glad we finally connected, and I apologize to you for the delays.
Don't worry about it. There are a lot worse delays than that. Let me introduce you. Larry Sabato, a Rhodes Scholar, University Professor of Politics at the University of Virginia, founder and director of the University of Virginia Center for Politics, the author of so many books, including The Kennedy Half Century, The Presidency, Assassination, and Lasting Legacy of John F. Kennedy. You have an amazing resume. And I thank you for being so generous with a small outfit like mine.
I appreciate the invitation, Jeff, and thank you. Thank you very much for the generous introduction.
Oh, you're very, very kind. It's the 60th anniversary of the JFK assassination. Can you begin by talking to us about what you would say was the impact at the time in the United States, perhaps all over the world, when this assassination happened?
Well, I wasn't around for the attack on Pearl Harbor, but at least for my lifetime, beginning in 1952, this was the greatest shock that the general public had seen or felt. And it was a shock, of course, that has lasted for many of us for these 60 years. But I don't think that there is anybody who would dispute the fact that November 22nd, 1963 was one of the ultimate flashbulb moments when wherever you were, whatever you were doing, you remember precisely how you heard, when you heard, and what you thought when the assassination first came into your worldview. For the vast majority of people, it was numbing. It wasn't just shocking, it was numbing. And most people were in disbelief that it could even have happened. They didn't believe it. They went out to try to confirm it. They were hoping that it didn't happen. They were begging people to tell them that it didn't happen. And unfortunately, it did happen.
On November 22nd, 1963, I was 5.5 years old. And listening to you, 1952, that's going to make you about 11 and a half or 11 years old. I'm in kindergarten, and we're in a semicircle, and my teacher, Miss Fessel, is reading us a story. And then over the intercom on the wall, right at the head of the classroom, the announcement is made: the president has been shot. First of all, I don't know whose idea that was. I'm not the only one who recalls that. And I immediately turned to Miss Fessel and I asked her, quote, "Am I going to get shot?" Now the memory fades. The memory gets degraded 60 years later, but darn it, I remember this. And my understanding of the assassination has been unfolding ever since for 60 years. Where were you, and what did you think, and what did you do?
Well, I was in parochial school, Jeff, and you can imagine the impact was even greater in that kind of environment. Um,
That's
I
right.
first became politically active with the encouragement of my dad, a World War II vet, during the 1960 campaign. And just by coincidence,
Wow.
Senator Kennedy came to my home city, Norfolk, on the Friday before the Tuesday election.
Hmm.
And my dad took me to the rally at a high school
Wow.
there in Norfolk on Granby Street. And it made a tremendous impression on me. I don't recall precisely what was said, although I do. I remember one line, and that was
Yeah.
Senator Kennedy saying, uh, "Now you in Virginia certainly don't want Richard Nixon being your president, what would Thomas Jefferson say?
A
Uh,
Democrat, sure.
yes, exactly. And so anyway, it was something that I followed daily, really, from then on, or even remember the debates to a certain degree until I fell asleep, I'm sure, on the couch. But
Right.
anyway, I was in the sixth grade. Uh,
Sure.
I had a nun teaching me, Sister Robert Merriam, and I remember it being the afternoon. It was the Friday before Thanksgiving, so we were we were doing something not terribly serious. I think we were maybe drawing a picture of a turkey. I don't know
Huh.
what precisely we were doing, but
Yeah.
somebody knocked at the door, and the sister went to the door, and she clearly was shocked. We saw the shocked expression, and she came back and paused for a minute, and then she said, "President Kennedy has been shot, but we don't know his current condition. So please pull out your rosaries." This
Mm,
was required equipment in
sure.
Catholic school. We all
Absolutely.
we all had them in our desks, so we pulled them out. We started reciting the rosary, and honestly, I don't know how long it was, maybe 20 minutes or so, maybe a little longer, when
Right.
someone came to the door again. And we didn't have to ask her what the individual said because she was crying and we knew
Mm,
what that meant. And it
hmm.
was very shortly thereafter that someone came on the PA system and said, "The President of the United States is dead. And you will proceed out to the breezeway and catch your bus, or your parents may be coming by to pick you up." And then we went to, in my case, with my cousin Donna, we went to my aunt Ella's house and watched television until my father came home, and then my mother took me over there, and we were in front of the TV for 4 days, like the rest of humanity.
Hmm. The political climate in Dallas was an interesting factor for the trip, and also in terms of the impact of the assassination. As an expert on political history and such, could you speak to that? What the political climate was like in Dallas, that served as in part an impetus for the Texas trip. Perhaps I could say the political climate in the whole state.
Yes, obviously this was the beginning of the campaign. In those days, we didn't have eternal campaigns. You know,
Hmm.
JFK announced for the presidency on January 2nd, 1960, the actual
Right,
year of the election. Now we have
right.
people running 3 years or more in
It's
advance. But
unbelievable.
yeah, it is unbelievable. And in this particular case, the campaign really was beginning with this trip. Why Texas? Well, there was a split in the Democratic Party, and Vice President Lyndon Johnson, a Texan, was unable to fix it himself. And he and the Texas governor, John Connally, who at that time was a Democrat, later switched
Right.
parties.
But he was
But
considered conservative, wasn't he, in the
yeah,
right wing of the party?
yeah, and of course, most Southern Democrats were conservatives in those
Hmm.
days. And they felt it was imperative that the president come down himself and patch things up to the
Hmm.
extent that he could. And he agreed because, frankly, he probably couldn't have been reelected unless he got Texas's electoral votes. He
Right.
had barely won it, 46,000 votes, which is nothing in Texas back in
Sure.
1960. And he absolutely needed Texas. So he thought it was a trip worth taking, and he agreed to visit multiple cities. The one they dreaded the most, no question, was Dallas, because Dallas had been the site of Adlai Stevenson, our UN ambassador, being spat upon and with a placard uh, hit him over the head just a few weeks prior to that.
Hmm.
And even Vice President Johnson and Lady Bird Johnson were spat upon in Dallas in the weeks or months leading up to this particular visit.
Hmm.
It wasn't that they ever thought they could win Dallas, it was rather that they hoped they could reduce the intensity of opposition to Kennedy there.
Hmm. Um, And of course, there were two factions: the liberal or the left part of the Democratic Party with Yarborough,
Yes.
and the right. And that seems very, very peculiar to some of us today, because you really don't have that sort of divide within a party. How would
Yes.
you
Well, Texas was more or less a one-party state. It was already changing, and Lyndon Johnson's Senate seat in
right?
May 1961 went Republican to John Tower. So things were
Mm,
changing, but mostly the election was in the Democratic primary. It was called tantamount to election, winning the Democratic primary.
right,
So you had the liberal faction fighting the conservative faction in the primary, and sometimes the conservatives won. Most usually the conservatives won, and occasionally the liberals won, as they did with Ralph Yarborough in
right.
1958, and then he was reelected in 1964, lost his seat in 1970.
Let me shift gears. Now I know that you, along with, I believe it's your staff at the Crystal Ball, Larry Sabato's Crystal Ball, has spent a considerable time looking at the documents that have recently been released on the JFK assassination. The documents being held by the government, if I'm correct. And I was wondering if you could speak to the the many conspiracy theories that occurred right from the beginning, exacerbated by the killing of Oswald, silencing the alleged shooter. And then, what, if anything, you've made of these documents that have been released?
Sure. Let me preface this, Jeff, by saying that I know now, after 60 years and after having gone down the rabbit hole myself many years ago,
Mm,
spending entirely too much time on this, that it will never be over. That this
mhm,
will never be resolved to even most people's satisfaction, much less
mhm,
everyone's satisfaction. And we both know that. Anyone who's paid attention to this understands that the Warren Commission, while I think many of its conclusions were accurate, did not do a comprehensive job. They did cut corners. Part of it was political pressure to get this over
right,
before the 64 election. Uh, Part of it was because the Warren Commission staff was never told some of the fundamentals, like the U.S. attempts to assassinate Fidel Castro, which had been quite a few and had been government sanctioned, even though some of the deals to assassinate were made with the mafia. So this was an incomplete effort that has led to almost 60 years of speculation, contrary proposals, the kind of thing that we still see about the Lincoln assassination. That was in
well,
April
yes,
of 1865, and we're still
well,
seeing books about the Lincoln assassination with
yes, but
new wrinkles.
well,
Uh,
I don't know. I haven't seen too many new wrinkles. I mean, we pretty much think that Booth did it.
Well, no,
Okay,
it's
and
not that Booth didn't do it. It's
right.
whether the Confederates funded all this and
Okay.
encouraged it from Canada.
I've
Uh,
never seen any evidence of that.
well, there. Look, I'm not getting into that one. It's enough for us
Right.
to discuss the Kennedy
Of
assassination.
course. Yeah.
But what I'm trying to say is, 100 years from now, or let's say 2063, which will be the 100th anniversary of the
Right.
Kennedy assassination, I won't be around, and probably you won't be either.
No,
But
no.
I can be sure, and you can be sure, that there will be people arguing about what actually happened and why. Um, what have we learned from the documents? We've spent an enormous amount of time
Mm,
reviewing everything that's come out and re-reviewing it and re-re-re-reviewing it. And there are some fascinating aspects to it. And we've been publishing some of this all the way along, and even on Twitter, or X Twitter, whatever,
right.
in my account at Larry Sabato and at the Center for Politics account, we've been publishing bits and pieces and interesting aspects for years, and even in the last few weeks and days. And we're going to do more of this between now and the end of the week. It's fascinating, and we're learning things that we didn't know before. But are we learning anything that changes fundamentally what we think we know about the assassination? Answer: no. Uh, Now, look, Jeff, if there ever was a document at the CIA or someplace else that described a conspiracy and listed the likely participants and explained why it happened, let me guarantee you it was destroyed a long time ago. There were lots of documents destroyed in the 1960s and the 1970s, lots of them. The CIA destroyed some, the FBI destroyed some. This is before the law passed in 1992 and signed by George H.W. Bush, Bush Sr., just less than a month before the 1992 election that he lost, required that all this information be turned over to a review board, and then it was supposed to be released by October of 2017, and of course, a lot of it has been, but we still have thousands of pages not released.
Right.
And there are various reasons for that, and we don't have time to go into all that. Maybe it's legitimate, maybe it isn't. But there's no question, we, the American people, we're not told the full truth. My argument is the full truth wouldn't have changed, in my opinion, the outline of what we know, but it would have given us more of a premise to the assassination, and afterward to the assassination. We could have understood the context better.
I used to be a conspiracy theorist until I read Case Closed by
Excellent book.
by Gerald Posner.
Yes.
And then I tried to get through Bugliosi's book.
It's a long one. Don't speak ill of the dead, Jeff. He was an outstanding fellow.
Oh, God bless him. And he was actually quite proud of his work, this particular work. I've listened to a lot of radio interviews where he talks about how comprehensive it is. Again, reclaiming history by Bugliosi. I used to be a conspiracy theorist. You said just a little bit ago that you went down a rabbit hole.
Yes.
I used to swear to people, absolutely, it was a conspiracy. I didn't know who it was for sure. And I read Case Closed, and I said, from all I can see, the only evidence, which would be indictable evidence, is that Oswald was a shooter. The shooter. And I asked conspiracy theorists, tell me, who is your defendant? And what evidence would you bring in an indictment? And I never get an answer to that.
Well, they have a long list of suspects, but look, and I don't want to make light of what they do. I appreciate what they do. If there is something hidden away that is of critical importance, they will find it, and we'll be very appreciative to them. But like you, I did not believe from, I guess, childhood on that just one person did it, and particularly this person who was such a wretched human being in so many ways,
antisocial.
Social outcast, social misfit. Can I just tell you a very brief personal story? I won't go on.
Please.
But remember, President Kennedy was assassinated on Friday, the Friday before the Thursday Thanksgiving. And it was the saddest Thanksgiving of our lives, I think, at least in a public manner. And I come from an Italian family. We had a big Italian Thanksgiving dinners. We always have. And loads of relatives were there sitting at the table. No one was in a particularly good mood. And all we discussed was the assassination, as I suspect was true across the country.
Sure.
We went around the table, and I was young. I didn't participate, but I listened. We went around the table, and the question was, who did it? Who was behind the assassination? Because the assumption was it couldn't have been Oswald. A few people guessed the mafia. I mean, after all, we were Italian.
Right.
You would have
Sure.
expected that.
Right.
A few people said the Russians, the Cubans were mentioned frequently, but mainly it was the CIA.
Hmm.
And I still remember my dad, who worked for the government. He worked for the Department of the Navy, World War II vet,
Yeah.
and he told us when we left not to mention anything about this conversation to anyone
Okay.
else outside the family.
And
Because
here,
you didn't do
here
that
we
back
are.
then. You were
Well,
careful about what you said
and here
in
we are
public.
60 years later, and we're
Yes.
talking. We're.
Well,
I don't
well,
think I.
I'm sorry to say my dad isn't here any longer, and the
Right.
other relatives aren't either. But the
Right.
point, every person cited Jack Ruby killing Lee Oswald. To
Yeah.
them, that was the absolute proof that Oswald was being rubbed out by the larger conspiracy, so he couldn't talk. And
And yeah,
it was plausible, Jeff. That was very
plausible.
plausible.
It's plausible. It's possible, and I don't think any of the folks like Gerald Posner, Bugliosi, perhaps yourself, um, rule out that someone else was involved or
Of
some organ.
course,
We don't know.
we don't know
And
exactly.
the thing about conspiracy theories is we don't want to accept by we have a tendency, a natural one, to not want to accept that such a great historical moment can be caused by a lone nut. We don't want to believe that. It's got to be something grander.
Yes, that is absolutely it, and particularly that it could be done by someone who had been an utter and abject failure throughout
Absolutely.
life. And we don't
Absolutely.
want to believe that could happen, but unfortunately history tells us it can happen and it does happen.
Right. Now, here we are 60 years later. My final question for you, and I appreciate your time, is his legacy is largely one of a great president. Largely. You do have some critics. I think, would it be fair to say that it's largely a great legacy? Um, and I think the assassination had a lot to do with that because when a president gets into a second term, uh, it seems that there's corruption involved. I know that there were investigations into LBJ right at the time of the assassination in terms of some of his real estate dealings. He was actually you may know he was thinking of picking a different vice president. What do you
Now,
think?
let me interrupt there. Let
Yeah,
me
sure.
interrupt
Is
because
that
that,
nonsense?
well, no, I wondered that myself and I thought that. And of course, many people have said that.
Yes.
Mrs. Lincoln, Evelyn
Yes.
Lincoln, the personal confidential secretary to President Kennedy, claimed that that was true.
Right.
I want to, I had the great privilege of having a number of interviews in person and written with Ted Sorensen, the
Okay.
wordsmith.
Of
John F.
course.
Kennedy's aide and wordsmith and almost alter ego in some ways.
Mm,
And he told me that was absolutely not true,
okay.
and that Mrs. Lincoln had simply said that, and
She made it up.
she claimed to know a lot of things that that you didn't know. Now, I wasn't there. I can't tell
Yeah.
you for sure. Mrs. Lincoln claimed that JFK said to her right before he left for
Right.
Dallas that he was going to put Terry Sanford on the ticket, the governor of North
Right.
Carolina, instead of Lyndon
Right.
Johnson. I don't
Right.
believe it. It makes no sense. Why was he going to Texas? So he could win
Exactly.
Texas. Do you think it would
Exactly.
have helped to win Texas if he dropped LBJ? No, it
That
wouldn't
makes
have.
sense. That
Yeah.
makes I'm glad you pointed that out to me. But why does it resonate so much for people like at least people like me, I would think you. 60 years later, again, I'm five and a half, and a lot of unfolding has occurred for me as I got older into middle school, high school, college, and now with the internet on YouTube, I can watch all of the TV and radio reports of it. Why does it still resonate so much today? And um, I just can't wrap my head around that this happened, if you follow what I'm saying.
Are you talking about the assassination or the Kennedy
Yes.
presidency? Yeah,
Well,
just the
well, both
assassination.
in a way, both
Yes.
because he doesn't even seem real to me in a way.
Yes. Uh, one thing I feel very strongly about, and I hope to stress again on Wednesday, the actual anniversary, is that,
Right.
of course, we examine and re examine the assassination for lots of good reasons. But I think it's also very important to use this opportunity and all those opportunities to remember what President Kennedy said and did,
Hmm.
because he was an unusually inspirational president.
Hmm.
And I see that in a way a lot of people don't, Jeff, because I'm still a classroom teacher. I'm in my
Right.
70s, and I'm sure we're approaching the point where the students are going to very diplomatically suggest that I have outlived my usefulness.
No,
But
in fact, I've said I would love to be your student.
well, you're very kind to
Yeah.
say that. I'm sure
Yeah.
some of them would be happy to give up their places in the class
Yeah,
to you.
I doubt it.
But the the important thing is we need to use this to remember why Kennedy had such an impact, only serving 2.5, a little more than 2.5 years. It was a
Mm,
very short presidency. And the reason I see this in a way other people don't is I have it's a class of about 150 students, and most semesters I teach it, and I watch them as I show excerpts of, the inaugural address and Ishmael ein Berliner speech and the
mhm,
American University speech and the civil rights nationally televised speech and the Cuban Missile uh, announcements and all the rest of it. They pay attention to John F. Kennedy in a way that they do not do for other presidents, even more contemporary ones,
mhm,
that their eyes glaze over. They do not glaze over for John F. Kennedy. He has a magical ability to bring people in and to have young people absorb information that is relevant to them, but not in a way they believed before they saw him. They learn lessons from him that are
mhm.
critical.
That's
And
interesting.
so that's why we need to focus on the life, not just the death, the
Right.
life of a very special president.
Now, just to play the other side a little bit, isn't it true that about half the country didn't support him throughout his entire presidency?
Well, he had fairly high approval ratings. Now,
Okay.
Google the Gallup ratings for Kennedy.
Yeah.
Actually, he was amazingly high from the Bay of Pigs, which was a disaster,
Right.
really all the way until his death.
Right.
He
Right.
never really dropped below the mid 50s and often was in the 60s or higher. It was a
Right.
different time, and we rallied
And he
around the president in
and
office.
he was president, and so his approval rating went up. You're saying after the election
Yes, because
as the
that's what we
incumbent,
did in those days.
right?
We unified in a way that we seem incapable of today. I'm sorry to say that, but
Oh,
it's
the
a fact.
times are just so different. And what I was trying to get at, though, and I'm going to let you go, but is I can't help but think that when he was assassinated, everything changed politically in our country, and we could say culturally. Some say the innocents died. Everything changed, and I can't help but think that his legacy has been strengthened as a in a large part because of the assassination. Do you know what I'm saying?
Oh no, I think you're absolutely correct, Jeff. Um, it underlined and made special the moments that we remembered, partly because there weren't that many. 2.5 years is a
Right.
short time. And it's amazing we remember as much as we do. But a lot of that is because of what you're saying. It's the assassination, the tragedy of it. The youngest president ever elected being the
Hmm.
youngest to die. And in the most
Hmm.
vicious way, sitting
Hmm.
next to his wife, who was covered with his brain matter and his blood.
Hmm.
This is something that can never be forgotten and should never be forgotten.
And LBJ used the legacy
Yeah.
to get a late cooperation from Congress, and he got through a lot of what maybe Kennedy might not have.
Oh, I agree with that completely. And Johnson deserves credit for being so skillful in
Hmm.
using the Kennedy legacy combined with his own legislative abilities and experience to produce a domestic record that still stands. It's right alongside the New Deal.
Well, and he was actually a New Deal Democrat. He
That's
met
right.
with he met with FDR, etc. You're a great person to interview. Your knowledge is great. What I love is that you describe complex factors in a very, very simple way. You don't use unnecessary jargon. You're very generous, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Jeff, I enjoyed it, and I want to salute you for taking the time to produce this series so that others can learn from it. There will be so many young people who see this who
Right.
really don't know a great deal about the Kennedy record. And so this is important for our country as well. So thank you for what you do.
Okay. Stay well, Larry, and
You
thank
too,
you.
Jeff.
Thank
Thanks
you.
a lot.
Take care.
Bye bye. Take care.
Yep. And there's Larry Sabato, Rhodes Scholar, University Professor of Politics at the University of Virginia, the founder and director of the U of Virginia Center for Politics, and the author of numerous books. The man is a genius, and he's so humble and speaks so clearly and simply about such complex things. I hope this was meaningful to all of you. Stay strong, stay well, and I'll catch you all next time.